Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine War news video, second part thereof for the 27th of August 2024, concerning all nuggets of information pertaining to the geopolitical ramifications of the war in Ukraine. Bill Kristol, the conservative never Trumper from the US, the presenter and one of the, I think he's the founder of the Bulwark. Anyway, he says, after today's attack on civilian targets, he said this, yes, after the massive wave of missiles and drones striking Ukraine. After today's attack on civilian targets throughout Ukraine, President Biden should 1. Remove restrictions on Ukraine attacking military targets in Russia. 2. Request another arms package for Ukraine. And 3. Visit Kyiv again to make clear we stand with Ukraine and for victory. I love Bill Kristol. He is a voice of reason at the moment. He's a really strong supporter of Ukraine whilst being a conservative of the older school variety, certainly not in the mold of what Trump is and where he's taking the GOP. So this is really good. I agree with that. I think Biden needs to have been much stronger in answering the attacks that we've seen over the last 2 nights now. I think there is a weakness in the Biden administration, and whether it's perpetuated by Jake Sullivan and people like him in the administration, or whether it is much more, I guess, explicitly the desire of Joe Biden in the direction he wants to take the US, or in his ideology behind being more dovish in relation to Russian violence and bellicose approaches to politics in this war. I don't know. I have this debate in my head all the time that I on the one hand, I think any president is busy dealing with all sorts of things across a whole range of domestic policy and international policy and running a country, the nuts and bolts of running a country, as well as the ideological politicking involved. And so therefore there's going to be an awful lot of delegation. That's why you have a National Security Council. That's why you have, in the UK, you've got the Department of Work and Pensions, you've got DEFRA, you've got this, you've got these groups of people who are working as civil servants and part of the administration to get stuff done, but also inform you. The question is, how much are they informing you of what the government is doing, irrespective of who you are as the number one, as a prime minister or the president? And how much are you dictating to them what needs to be done when you are just a single human being? You can't have... Think of all the knowledge that we have gained on the Ukraine war. I spend 12 hours a day on the Ukraine war at the exclusion of other areas. And my brain couldn't process this amount of information on all areas of government. Right, you were physically unable to do that. And so the best one in the world, the president, any president, is only going to have a limited amount of knowledge on an area, one area at a time. So he will have a limited amount of knowledge on pensions, on healthcare, on Ukraine, but then also likewise Taiwan and the Middle East and all these different areas around the world, and then all the different areas of domestic policy, etc., etc. So you have to delegate. You have to delegate to people to gain all the requisite information on a given area, and then relay the summarization of that back to you. And you can kind of mold policy in the direction you want to go. If you're naturally more dovish, then so on and so forth. The question here is, how much is Jake Sullivan dictating Ukrainian policy to Biden, and how much is Biden dictating policy to his administration? My opinion is that it's probably more being dictated by his national security advisors that he has trust in, but then there is a feedback loop going on there where he has trust in them because they do the sorts of things that he aligns with. So therefore, he has to be somewhat agreeing, or more than somewhat agreeing, with the anti-escalation rhetoric and the anti-escalation policy that the Biden administration is taking. So I don't know. I had these debates the whole time, and as you can tell, I never quite fully agreed one way or the other. I do think that Jake Sullivan has a lot to answer for, possibly more than Biden himself. So maybe there is some kind of conclusion. But am I thinking that because I want to get Biden off the hook? I'm always kind of questioning myself in these regards. But there's certainly delegation takes place in all governments, and you're only garbage in, garbage out. You're only as good as the information. Your decisions are only as good as the information that you are working from. And if you're having that somewhat curated to you, we talk about this with regard to Putin all the time. And Putin's in a much worse position than someone like Biden or Starmer or any other leader, Macron, because Putin has very little ability to check information because he doesn't use the internet, he distrusts it, doesn't have a smartphone, etc., etc. All these other people can at least check whether they're going in the right direction and get some kind of guidance on how popular their decisions are by looking at social media, etc., etc. Putin doesn't do that. But anyway, I'm completely digressing here. It would be great for Biden to be much stronger on these attacks by Russia and to provide Ukraine with the requisite weaponry. Now, the Kursk operation is related to Ukraine's second peace summit, says Zelensky. He said a number of things on the Kursk operation that is part of this military, diplomatic, military, political approach that he's taking. So it's not just about taking Kursk territory for operational gains and the Sudzha railway for tactical, operational, strategic gains in a military sense. This is about bargaining chips with Putin. This is about territory exchange. This is about, yes, buffer zones as well, those kind of operational buffer zones. So it's a bit of everything, and that seems to be what Zelensky is open to admitting. He's also going to present the US with a victory plan in September. This has come from a recent interview he's just done on stage that actually had a number of nuggets in. So speaking at Ukraine 2024 Independence Forum in Kyiv, President Zelensky said that the ongoing Kursk incursion was one of the parts of this plan. So this victory plan, this is, again, shows that Kursk is a political military project. Right, Russians are going to commit sabotage using drones at NATO. Were going to commit sabotage using drones at NATO's Geilenkirchen airbase in Germany, according to Deutsche Presseagentur, a DPA agency. They reported, citing German intelligence, that there are 14 Boeing E-3A airborne warning and control systems AWACS planes based at Geilenkirchen airfield, equipped with long-range radars and sensors capable of detecting air and surface targets at long distances. Such aircraft fly at altitudes of 9,150 meters and cover a surveillance area of more than 300,000 square kilometers. Earlier this year, the Russian armed forces lost two similar Russian-made A-50 reconnaissance aircraft. So sabotage is at play, it appears, particularly in Germany. This is a definite worry, and a base like that is going to be incredibly important, central almost, to Ukraine's defense, to their war effort, given the amount of intelligence that these aircraft must be gathering 24/7. What do we do with that? Like, I've talked about this previously. When does cyber warfare, for example, get to a point where it is tipping the switch for invoking Article 5 of the of NATO, for example? So yes, there's plausible deniability, but at some point you've got to say, right, Russia really are attacking our hospital systems. That's enough for war. It's the same here. Like, when is this kind of sabotage enough for Germany to go, hang on, guys, like, this is an act of war against Germany. Like, irrespective of what's going on in Ukraine, you are sabotaging German military efforts here. And therefore, we are now going to say we're at war. Of course, that's what they don't want to do. So as a result, Russia can get away with doing stuff like this, knowing that no country is going to want to say, we're going to go to war with you now, Russia, because that's a whole can of worms that they don't want to open. So Russia does have an awful lot of elbow room here to do some dastardly things. with regard to Russia, with regard to Europe, and with regard to UK, and with regard to the US. And what more can those countries do? I mean, the only thing Germany can really add is like, okay, that's enough. Now we're going to give Taurus. But it seems like Scholz will never give Taurus. So, yeah, I think Russia, this allows Russia quite a large degree of power, I think. That I do understand. I do understand that countries don't want to say, right, enough's now, because you have to take it to the next level. And that's very, very dangerous, and involves, overt war. Right. No reports states that China, Brazil, Indonesia and South Africa are urging global support for their new peace plan aimed at resolving the conflict in Ukraine, as they call it. So I reported on this in my previous video as well, because it pertained to Russia apparently also recruiting Indonesian soldiers or people for the Russian army. So Li Hui, China's special representative on Eurasian affairs, believes that increased support for this plan would enhance the prospects of de-escalation and peace. The plan includes principles such as ceasing hostilities, protecting civilians, avoiding weapons of mass destruction, and supporting international cooperation. While China has not attended the Global Peace Summit, it claims that 110 countries support its plan. So it's saying that, hey, we've got a more popular peace plan than the actual one at the Ukrainian Peace Summit. And here we are proposing this as a kind of BRICS sans India. It's interesting that Modi's just been to Kiev and India isn't part of this. But this is BRICS replacing India with Indonesia. China, Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa. Anyway, that is something to keep an eye on. You just can't help but think that anything coming from these sort of countries that pretends to be, it is pretension. It pretends to be a peace plan for the benefit of both those nations, but you can't help but think it will be more likely to the benefit of Russia. Now, speaking about India, quote, India leaves Russia without stainless steel. Supplies have fallen threefold. There's all this interesting interaction between India and Russia, China and Russia, with regard to hydrocarbons. India and China are both in positions of power with regard to negotiations with Russia. And so therefore, on the one hand, they're not really bothered about the moral aspect of the war with Ukraine. This is something happening over there. They don't really place morality first when it comes to, not many countries do, when it comes to making decisions that affect your own citizens, that benefit your nation as a whole. So getting cheap hydrocarbons from Russia will benefit India more than the moral decision to condemn Russia for invading Ukraine. And so therefore India and China will be like, yeah, okay, we'll pay some lip service to Russia being naughty for overstepping the mark with Ukraine. On the other hand, we are going to say that we want all of Russia's hydrocarbons, and because Russia are desperate, because they've been ostracized by Europe and the US, we are going to demand super low prices. Then when we had Modi hugging Putin previously in May, was it? And then Modi recently visiting Kiev to hug Zelensky, we're trying to work out what India are doing. Like with China, they are being careful because the secondary sanctions with China are affecting Chinese banks and how they interact with Russia. And so there are elements of the Chinese administrations and economy and infrastructure and the Chinese and Indians, there are elements of them walking this tightrope between appeasing Russia and appeasing the US Treasury Department and sanctions and considering international views. And so here, I don't know what's happened here, but India appear to be leaving Russia in a bit of a bind with regard to the supply of stainless steel. Is that as a result of the US getting involved and twisting the arm of India? Is that a case of India trying to appease the US? Is that something to do with grinding down, getting prices as high as possible, or grinding down Russian resolve in doing deals So they know that Russia are desperate, and you can say, right, we're not going to provide you with any stainless steel, and then Russia go, oh, but we desperately need it. How else can we build our stuff? How else can we keep our refurbishment of old equipment going? And then India says, okay, well, in that case, you need to buy it for this amount, and then Russia are going to be left with no other option. I don't know. Lots of me speculating there. But anyway, Moscow Times, the exiled Russian newspaper, reports that. Justin, no one will sign an agreement with Russia on... who's Justin? With Russia on extending the transit of Russian gas through Ukraine. This is the end of the deal. So Zelensky is being very strong on hydrocarbon supply from Russia through to Hungary and Slovakia. What's it called? I forget the name of it. But anyway, the pipeline that goes through Ukraine that's been so controversially shut down, at least controversial for Hungary and Slovakia, they aren't getting their Russian hydrocarbons. They've appealed to the EU, said this is really unfair. Look what Ukraine are doing. And the EU have gone, deal with it. And Ukraine have said, well, look, this is what happens when you support Russia, when you are being very difficult, when the EU is trying to give aid to us, military and financial aid to us, and you guys, Orban and Fitzo, are the ones that are causing us a problem, then we can cause you a problem. And there's the approach here from Zelensky is that ain't going to change. We ain't turning it back on. Fascinating. Right. The French have released the official charges against CEO of Telegram, Pavel Durov. This is a continuing debacle that is causing the Russians a lot of consternation. They're up in arms. Here is the press release. So the judicial investigation was opened against a person unnamed on charges of complicity, webmastering an online platform in order to enable an illegal transaction in an organized group, refusal to communicate at the request of competent authorities information or documents necessary for carrying out and operating interceptions allowed by law. In other words, you're breaking the law as according to French law. Here you go. Also, complicity, possessing pornographic images of minors, complicity, distributing, offering or making available pornographic images of minors in organized groups, complicity, acquiring, transporting, possessing, offering or selling narcotic substances, complicity, offering, selling or making available without legitimate reason equipment, tools, programs or data designed to or adapted to get access and to damage the operation of an automated data processing system, complicity, organized fraud, criminal association with a view to committing a crime or an offence punishable by 5 years or more of imprisonment. And it goes on. Laundering of the proceeds derived from organised groups, offences and crimes, providing cryptology services aimed to ensure confidentiality without certified declaration, providing a cryptology tool, not solely ensuring authentication or integrity monitoring without prior declaration, and importing a cryptology tool ensuring authentication or integrity monitoring without prior declaration. So then they say, the investigative magistrates in charge of this preliminary judicial investigation have requested a co-referral of the Centre for the Fight Against Cybercrime and the Anti-Fraud National Office for the pursuance of the investigation. So this is pretty serious. They've listed now the crimes, and a lot of these are complicity in doing these things. So the Telegram allowing these crimes to take place, and I presume doing nothing about it, and therefore being complicit, is kind of the like I always talk about, walking past a drowning person in a pond. If I could stop them from drowning, but I don't stop them, I just stand there and watch them drown, then this is a duty of rescue. I know I've talked about this a number of times, and this can be found in law in certain places, but it's an analogy here. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's the idea that I am complicit in this person drowning. I'm not physically drowning them, but I'm standing here, I know that they're drowning, I'm watching them drown, and I'm allowing them to drown. Or I'm sitting there watching someone. Maybe it's on my property. Maybe I own an arcade, right? And I'm watching on CCTV someone mugging someone else, and I sit there and go, yeah, I'm not going to do anything about that. I'm going to allow that to happen. I'm going to allow it to happen all the time on my arcade. As long as people are putting money into my arcade and they're playing machines and they're enjoying their machines over there and they're enjoying their machines over there, I know there's mugging here. I can see it on my CCTV. Oh, well, I know it's happening. Who cares? It's that kind of complicity to these things happening. So he is allowing on his platform all these things to take place and doing nothing about it. And when being asked, this is how I interpret it anyway, when being asked to give documentation and to communicate about this, he's refusing to cooperate with the authorities, then that makes that complicity even worse. It's like, hang on, we're trying to stop this happening. You're saying that you're not going to help us. We've asked you for these documents and you're not going to give them. Therefore, it seems that not only are you allowing it to happen, but you're putting impediments in place to stop us from stopping it happening. And this is why he's been arrested. Right. Then this has caused all sorts of backlash from people like Elon Musk and others, and we'll come on to that. Russian hackers apparently have crashed a website of France's National Cybersecurity Agency, which is handling the Durov case. Quote, the French National Cyber Unit is flying offline. France, would you seriously trust such an agency to lead an investigation? Said representatives of the Evil Web group. Talk about nominative determinism there. Talk about letting people know who you really are. We're the Evil Web. What do you guys do? Are you guys for like the moral rectitude of the world? Are you trying to make the world a better place? No, we're literally called Evil Web. Showing the results of their attack, the agency's website has been down since yesterday. Earlier, Reuters reported that France's National Cybercrime Unit and the National Anti-Fraud Office are investigating Durov's case. He's had his not incarceration, but they've extended the amount of time that they can keep him at the moment. Now, Adam Kinzinger, the US Republican who's endorsing Harris, said the arrest of the founder of Telegram has stirred up the pro-Russia crowd, supposedly under the guise of, scare quotes, free speech, yet they support the least free country. This is absolutely hilarious, of course, that people shouting about free speech. Oh, this is terrible. Telegram should be allowed to do X, Y, and Z. This is an attack on free speech. These are the people that do not criticize Russia, who have an absolute restriction on freedom of speech and freedom of press in their country. It's just the double standards are absolutely insane. And Kinzinger says there is a reason they are scared. Stay tuned. Whether he is cognizant of some information about this, I don't know. Now, the founder of the video hosting site Rumble. So Rumble is the equivalent to YouTube, but it's owned by a really right-wing person. People have said, if I have issues with YouTube, you should go to Rumble. Rumble is the sort of place where someone like me would not really be that welcome. I'm kind of reluctant to dip my toe into Rumble particularly, but I know some of you will love it. According to the businessman, the founder of Rumble has left the EU after Durov's arrest. According to the businessman, Rumble does not intend to tolerate such behaviour of the French authorities and will use every legal means available to fight for freedom of expression, a universal human right. But of course, there are these, like I explained yesterday, when you have a whole load of different rights competing against each other, you have to have a hierarchy of rights. And you can't just think that the right to freedom of speech is the only right and it trumps all other rights. At some point, it comes into contact with other rights, and you have to establish which right has hierarchy over the other rights. And it's not always freedom of speech wins out there. And in those situations, you need jurisprudence to navigate those difficult terrains. And sometimes people who advocate for freedom of speech fall afoul of the law because they're impinging on other rights. And this is what's happened with Durov. There are other rights or other laws which kind of reflect rights that he has fallen foul of, and he is being held accountable. Well, is looking to be held accountable for those infractions. Anyway, this is having ramifications across social media platforms and the information world. Now, Republicans Against Trump here says Trump and MAGA find more common ground with Russia, China, and North Korea than our allies. This is America first. This is MAGA. So what they're talking about? So cat turd sounds ridiculous, but is one of the biggest proponents of freedom of speech on Twitter, on X, and is a massive supporter of Musk, and Musk is a massive supporter of cat turd, right? Not one person in the USA should travel to Europe. They're more fascist and communist than North Korea. They're more fascist and communist than North Korea and China combined. I don't want to unpick that. Anyway, we should declare them all enemies of the United States because they're the enemies of freedom and free speech, and they're run by fascist dictators who cheat in their elections to stay in power. Are you January the 6th, anyone? Georgia, anyone? Anyway, they're no different than Stalin, Mussolini, or Hitler. And of course, this is to go back to what you're talking about. This is someone that sees freedom of speech, which is for them the freedom to insult who they like, but when they get insulted, they don't like that. So there's already like a whole slew of issues to do with their version of freedom of speech. But again, it's that freedom of speech is the only right, and everything else is irrelevant. So it doesn't matter about all these other crimes because I'm only worried about freedom of speech. And yet, claiming that fascism and communism are issues, but actually not ever saying anything against those nations like Russia, for example. In fact, it's interesting that they mention North Korea and China, but not Russia there. That's an interesting one. Anyway, you've got to understand how this Durov situation is being handled by both the Russians and those in the US who would appease Russia. And they will go to the freedom of speech thing the whole time. Now, when you're talking about freedom of speech, and someone, Cat Toad, who's a massive supporter of Elon Musk, look at this. Brian Krasenstein says, why is Twitter or X censoring content that is pro-Harris and marking it as sensitive when it is not anything sensitive? And what you're seeing are people that are trying to spread Kamala Harris stuff, having their content cloaked with the sensitive cover there. That means that it's more difficult to spread, gets less purchase, etc., etc. And you're like, okay, so if Twitter really is freedom of speech, then why is it that some people are freer than others? Why is it that Trump, not Trump, but actually, why is it that Musk himself is amplified more than anyone else? So, and why is it that people that he doesn't like Kamala Harris, or people supporting Kamala Harris, have their information and their images censored? So again, where is Cat Turd talking about this kind of stuff happening on Twitter? Where is he talking about the coding that de-amplifies pro-Ukrainian voices that was enacted by Musk earlier on in the war? So then this is interesting. This came out from Anonymous. I'm sure this is the hacktivist group Anonymous. You're Anon Central here, talking about Musk's connection with Russia here. So I'm going to read this to you. Putin's oligarchs linked to funding Musk's takeover of X or Twitter, and yes, it has links to Donald Trump and manipulating the US election and sabotaging Ukraine. Among the investors that helped Musk take over Twitter are 8VC, a venture capital firm founded by Trump backer Joe Lonsdale, and that employs the children of Russian oligarchs Peter Avon and Vadim Moshkovich, both of whom are under sanctions for their ties to Russia and involvement in its war with Ukraine. Both of their sons, Jack Moshkovich and Denis Avon, were hired by 8VC despite their father's deep connections to Putin. Jack Moshkovich joined the venture capital fund in 2018, after which he obtained permanent residency in the US in 2024. Denis Avon joined the fund in 2022. 8VC invests in companies that fulfill contracts for the US Department of Defense and NATO. 8VC stands out as one of the 100 largest backers of the acquisition of Twitter. Joe Lonsdale is a billionaire Trump supporter, co-founder of Palantir, the founder of 8VC and founder of Cicero Institute, defended his decision to hire both Jack Moshkovich and Denis Avon, claiming that they were hired based on their professional abilities and not their familial ties. Joe Lonsdale is a billionaire Trump supporter who was awarded with government contracts since 2003 and started with the PayPal mafia. So these are the tech bros, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, etc., etc. He recently declared his allegiance to the Kremlin-tied candidate. He's close friends with Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, and who are also backing Donald Trump, JD Vance, and are linked to Yavin, a rambler of a regressive ideology that aims to destroy democracy and Western plurality, an aim that can be reached by backing Putin's regime in Russia that follows the Duginist sect. So that's Alexander Dugin, the nationalist philosopher who underwrites all of Putin's thoughts. Anyway, Russian billionaire oligarch Peter Avon, the founder of Alpha Group and a long-standing ally of Putin, has been involved in lobbying to lift sanctions on Russia and played a key role in covering for Putin during an illegal trade scandal in 1992. A few weeks before Trump took office in 2016, Avon approached Washington lobbyist Richard Burt with a request to establish a communications channel between the Kremlin and Trump's transition team. Remember Paul Manafort? Anyone? Or as I say, go and watch Active Measures. It was on Prime, Amazon Prime. I don't know if it still is, but it's an absolutely insanely good documentary that looks at the compromise of Trump's administration through Paul Manafort and others. The compromise by Russia. This effort, directed by Putin himself, was part of a broader attempt by Russia to engage with Trump's administration. During the summer of 2016, researchers observed what appeared to be a covert digital communication channel between the Trump Organization and Alpha Bank, designed to operate secretly and exclude outside monitoring. Simultaneously, reports surfaced suggesting the Trump campaign had influenced the Republican Party's platform to favor Russian policies on Ukraine, though the campaign denied involvement. Adding to concerns, Trump stated in an interview that he might not defend NATO allies if they were invaded by Russia, signaling a shift towards a Russia-friendly stance. Vadim Moshkovich, a Russian agrarian billionaire and part of Putin's inner circle, is a former chairman of the board of directors of agro-industrial firm Rosagro and, scare quotes, resigned after being hit by EU sanctions. His net worth is an estimated £1.84 billion. He also served in the Federation Council, the upper chamber of the Russian parliament, from 2006 to 2014. So you have these connections to the Trump administration transition teams, to Russian oligarchs, to the funders of Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter. And then you wonder why Elon Musk has all these opinions changing towards Ukraine that seem to be going in a pro-Russian way, and then starts hitting like pro-Ukrainian handles with constrictions and restrictions. And you know, it all looks like it is at least somewhat connected. Slightly worrying. And then where does David Sachs fit in all of this? PayPal Mafia and Yarvanist. All these guys need to get RICO'd, says Anonymous. And I would agree with that. But RICO and racketeering, won't go into that. But yeah, interesting connections exposed there. Now, talking about connections, Jane Keefe says there is no Kremlin proxy that is not endorsing Trump. This is not a coincidence. Again, it goes back to what we just read and about these connections of Paul Manafort, who was lobbying on behalf of Yanukovych for Russia through Ukraine, was part of Trump's 2016 team. Now what are we hearing? That Tulsi Gabbard has just endorsed Trump. Now someone on my threads is saying, look, I think it was John Oliver saying, look at these Democrats and people who have endorsed Trump, as if, you know, this is a good sign for Trump. The people who are endorsing Trump are thoroughly problematic. Tulsi Gabbard was a Democrat, but then went conspiracy, is basically like RFK Jr., went conspiracy theory nut job, and then went anti-NATO, pro-Russia, and then got involved in supporting Trump. So Tulsi Gabbard, a Russian asset who blamed Ukraine and the US for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, has endorsed Donald Trump for president. So it goes back to Jane Kiev saying, it's no surprise that all the people that are endorsing Trump at the moment are people who are pro-Russian. Julia Davis, a vote for Trump is a vote for Putin, says Republicans against Trump. Now, Julia Davis from Russian Media Monitor said, meanwhile, on Russian state TV, another translated clip of Tucker Carlson and Tulsi Gabbard, introduced by state TV host Vladimir Solovyev as our girlfriend Tulsi. So Tulsi Gabbard is seen by Solovyev, a Russian propagandist, as our girlfriend. After the clip plays, one panelist asks, is she some sort of Russian agent? The host quickly replies, yes. I mean, this is what Russian propagandists are saying, that literally she is an agent of Russia endorsing Trump. You have to wonder, if you're endorsing Trump, why is it that all these bad guys are endorsing Trump? Like, is this the guy, you know, it's the old Mitchell and Webb comedy skit where they're wearing all the SS gear in the Second World War with the skulls on and everything. And at some point, David Mitchell goes, have you ever wondered whether we're actually the bad guys? And it's an absolutely brilliant skit. I've actually shown it to you before on the channel. But it's here, like, if I was supporting Trump, I'd be looking around going, I'm looking at all these people from David Duke to Fuentes to all these people that seem to be very much in favour. It's a white supremacist, and we've got Putin and his propagandists, and we've got am I supporting the right guy here? So Adam Kinzinger, former Republican lawmaker, says for all those national security Republicans who haven't made the leap. So he then responds to that last tweet I was going through, saying that actually, he got up at the DNC, Adam Kinzinger said, right, the Democrats are now the party of national security. And if you don't believe me, look at stuff like this. Look at who is endorsing Donald Trump. And so he's being absolutely on point about this. Now, funnily enough, back in 2020, Kamala Harris, who is presently running for president, called out Tulsi Gabbard when she was still more affiliated with the Democrats. Tulsi Gabbard ran for president, right, as a Democrat. And then she just spent the next few years going in a wingnut direction. But even at that time in 2020, Kamala Harris had her figured out. Check this out, 2020.
I think that it's unfortunate that we have someone on the stage who is attempting to be the Democratic nominee for president of the United States, who during the Obama administration spent 4 years full-time on Fox News criticizing President Obama.
That's
who
ridiculous,
has spent full-time,
That's
who
ridiculous.
has spent full-time criticizing people on this stage as affiliated with the Democratic Party. When Donald Trump was elected, not even sworn in, buddied up to Steve Bannon to get a meeting with Donald Trump in the Trump Tower, fails to call a war criminal by what he is as a war criminal, and then spends full time during the course of this campaign, again, criticizing the Democratic Party.
So like she had her figured out as a sort of a grifter back then in 2020, a grifter for whoever would give her power and so on and so forth. So she's not a true Democrat. So the idea that and it's not a no true Scotsman fallacy. This is the idea that she's always been a bit out there and is someone that appears to be pro-Putin. And it says that the fault of the war lies at the feet of NATO expansionists and et cetera, et cetera. So is it a surprise that she has endorsed Trump? Not really. And then you've got RFK Jr. coming out still, after decades of aggressive expansion. Does anyone really think that NATO is a defensive alliance anymore? And Ilya Ponomarenko here, formerly of the Kyiv Independent, says, oh yes, we sure as hell do. Given the fact that Russian bombs and missiles are not falling on Tallinn, Riga and Vilnius, so the Baltic state capitals, and are absolutely falling on Kyiv, which you denied NATO membership for 20 years to please Putin and prevent a war. Oh my God, who's going to solve this mystery? What's the reason behind that? In other words, I mean, it's such an annoying argument, this, from people like RFK Jr. They just need their faces slapping around and a bit of education on NATO. Like, countries don't get sucked up by NATO. Countries go to NATO. Right? And they say, we want to be... Look at what happened after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact. The countries went straight to NATO and said, we want to join you as a defensive organisation so we don't get attacked by these guys because we know what they're like. And the Baltics, like, yeah, we're going to join NATO because we know what they're like. And what's happened? Those countries have not been attacked by Russia. Who has been attacked by Russia? A country not in NATO that wanted to join NATO, but NATO said no. And other people said no. Is clearly a defensive organisation, and it works as a defensive organisation. So people like RFK Jr. can frickin' sod off as far as I'm concerned. Absolute plum tool. Right. Michael McFaul, former ambassador to Russia, 2012 to 14, I think, yeah, says Trump and Vance are out of touch with their own party on Ukraine. Check these numbers out. Right. So I don't want to alienate. I've already alienated most of my Republican supporters here, but I differentiate between Republican, old school kind of Reagan Republicanism, and this kind of new style of MAGA Republicanism, which I think is a blight, is a blot on the landscape of the Republican Party. Now, this is kind of supported by stats like this, right? More Americans, including a growing number of Republicans, want the US to stay the course in supporting Ukraine as long as it takes. So there is this divergence of opinion between actual Republicans on the ground and the direction that people like Steve Bannon and Donald Trump Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. coming on board as well, and Steve Miller and your Tim Pools and etc. etc. All of that, the Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, those people are saying we think the Republican Party should be taking this route in dealing with Russia and Ukraine, and actually that is a difference from what the people on the ground actually believe. So let's more Americans, including a growing number of Republicans, want the US to stay the course in supporting Ukraine as long as it takes. Take a look at my analysis of our latest UMD critical polls, says Shibli Talami. So here we have, how long should the US stay the course in supporting Ukraine? So here we have the Republicans dipping throughout the war as that rhetoric was being proposed and propagated by those people I've just mentioned. But actually, reality is hopefully having an effect there in getting people back up to those who said 1 to 2 years, and those who said as long as it takes. So actually 1 to 2 years went down and then up again, but as long as it takes has actually been solidly on the rise for Republicans at 25%, moving to 31, down a bit again, but up to 37%. So that is a really big rise from September to October 2023 to now. There's an 8% rise there. That's really significant. And the independents and Democrats are way above that, but that is still a move in the right direction. So, yeah, okay, it still could be better, but actually, 1 to 2 years, or as long as it takes, combined, put the Republican, the Republican electorate in a much more sensible position than you would think if you just listen to people like Trump himself for a start. And JD Vance, of course, I've got JD Vance, who is the most kind of anti-Ukrainian, it seems, at the moment. Well worth understanding that kind of corrective. Now, what a quote here. Again, when you look around and say, who are my friends, who wants to support us? When you look at some of these Russian propagandists, so Russia wants a bigger, better civil war in the United States. More than just village idiots storming the Capitol. In other words, January the 6th, we want way more than that. So they are vying for the US to become so divisive, the political landscape and the rhetoric to be so divisive that it explodes into people not accepting the results of the election and having a January the 6th times 10. So as this guy says, not just village idiots like Shaman storming the Capitol. Remember that guy, painted face with a big sort of, bear skin, whatever it was, like the shamanic garb, and then he sat in Congress and he got himself in trouble, rightfully in trouble. But anyway, he didn't do it rightfully. So not just village idiots like that storming the Capitol. We want a proper civil war. That's what they're gunning for. And when you listen to some of the rhetoric coming particularly from the MAGA groups, then you can foresee that happening. When there is this idea that if the Democrats win, it has to be because they cheated. Therefore, any Democrat win by default will be challenged and will not be accepted. You've got a situation where it's impossible for the other side to legitimately win an election. Like if that's where you're starting from, that's really dangerous, and it's exactly what the Kremlin wants, of course. So just be careful, guys. Anyway, that's enough from me banging on. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Toodle pits.